Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish in all the major podcast and social media platforms, and of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Hey, Tyler, good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
What's new in your world?
What is new in my world? Oh my goodness. Plenty's new in my world. Excited to be here to talk about music and art and get to know you a little bit. And more recent updates, not that people necessarily know much about my life, but I just moved to Mexico City from Knoxville, Tennessee about 4 months ago. So that's like the newest character in my life and uh, a whole wild adventure that I'm on.
That is wild. So it's not like you went from Knoxville to Chattanooga or Knoxville to Charlotte or Knoxville to Nashville. There's got to be a story, but you're involved with something called Casa de Copas.
Yeah, thanks
Is
for
that
doing some
right?
homework.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
you're
so is that
right.
tell us about that and like what inspired that and how did the move happen?
Yeah, well, one could argue that moving to Chattanooga or Charlottesville might have been smarter, but to hell with being smart, whatever that means. Um, yeah, I lived in Knoxville for the last almost 20 years. Went to college there and started this music project, my band, from there. And it was a really good home base. But as I kind of got older and a little burned out on the road and kind of life took different shapes and forms, sort of hunkered down in a day job in Knoxville for the last 6 or 7 years while trying to like work on music in the background, but kind of trying to pay the bills. And it's hard to make money playing music. And so sort of was like, okay, maybe I don't know. Maybe this is how it needs to look for me. That you kind of have your day job, like we were talking about before I started recording, and have this passion project. But just started to feel parts of myself like die a little bit and start to wither away, and wasn't really sure what the next move in my life was going to be. Because I had, for better for worse, kind of told myself that music wasn't an option. Um, in that sort of like serious formal like professional kind of way, or like the only thing in my life. And then a buddy of mine that I used to play music with in the States, probably 10 years ago, a guy named John Paul, his project's Boom Forest. Him and I have sort of just stayed in touch, and I called him last summer just to kind of shoot the shit. And he told me that he moved to Mexico City, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy! Tell me more." And he was starting this a recording studio slash label slash sort of community space, and the spirit of it is really kind of try to build artistic creative community, the kind of the one a type that like we had always wanted, to build a kind of place that we had hoped we would have found when we were in our 20s or early 30s or something and never quite did. It's like, what if we made it ourselves? And he's like, man, I could use some help. Do you want to come down? And he must have hit me at the perfect little existential moment, because once that seed was planted, it was pretty hard to ignore that um, there was some door was being opened in front of my wife and I, and we were like, well, what if we just took a leap? It had been a while since we'd done that, if ever. Um, and so pretty quickly we just decided, hey, let's just go for this and figure it out. So we are in the throes of figuring it out.
Well, good for you. That takes a next level of ambition, like not in a weird way, but ambition
Yeah.
and inspiration. So, and for
Naivety,
those,
perhaps.
yeah, lots of things, I guess. And for those that may not really know you, so you're Tyler, but the band and I think the moniker that you've performed under is called Cereus Bright, and I think
Yeah,
it's spelled Cereus. So
you
just for
got it.
context, so that's how you've been performing in the States
Hmm.
since you started. I guess
Yeah.
10, 12 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, probably was maybe even a smidge longer than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never really expected, kind of fumbled into or stumbled into making music. I'd always written songs, but it was always very private and personal, and never really had a desire or thought that I'd be, playing them out and about for people. And then speaking of existential crises, after college, kind of didn't have a plan, didn't really know what the next step was, and had kind of only gotten that far in my brain and my plan, and started to play around Knoxville and met some talented musicians, and we ended up starting this band together, and kind of just kept taking the next step, and before you know it, we were recording music and touring all over the U.S. and kind of giving it a good run, and so yeah, it's taken a lot of different shapes and sizes. So once we decided to not maybe be touring as much or at all, I kind of reabsorbed it as like my own kind of solo project. So the last two records, this one that's coming out included, um, really kind of centered around me and my songwriting, but bringing in talented musicians and people that I love to work with to help bring the songs to life.
Oh, that's neat. So Mexico City, I've only been there once. Food's amazing, and there's a lot of people
It is.
there.
Both are true. Both are very true.
Yeah. But what about the community and the uh, the art community specifically
Yeah.
that your friend was drawn to? And I guess what are you hoping to sort of contribute to that? And it, like, is this like I know you grew up in the church. This reminds me of hearing about the families that
Mm,
go off on mission trips that are like,
mm.
oh, we're going for 2 years. Like, is you just playing that by ear, but are you committed? Like, hey, we're going to be down there for a year and see how it goes. And what are you hoping to get out of that?
Yeah, for sure. You know, uh, the short answer is I don't know. I mean, I think we kind of said to ourselves, "Hey, let's at least go for a year." And as we're kind of getting our legs under us, we're realizing, oh, we probably need to be here longer than that. Anyways, just to kind of fully see this through. Um, but even to say like see it through, I didn't even fully know what that means. I think if anything, this move for us was just trying to like listen to that some sort of inner voice, some sort of desire that I don't know, was hoping to build a life that felt a little bit more in sync and aligned with who we were. Like my wife and I both felt like the sort of life shape that was forming or had formed, and we were kind of seeing it in front of us. There was some friction and dissonance, and I was like, wait, I don't know if this looks like us, and we don't want to be ungrateful for the life that we had, but at the same time wanted to pursue something that felt a little bit more like us. And so, kind of to your first question, in terms of like the community, yeah, I think that's what we're looking to build and to find. And I think that's something that artists and creatives and people generally, but especially artists and creatives kind of all over are looking for. I know that I've certainly struggled. A lot of musicians are struggling in the US and over the world, but let's talk about the
Mhm.
US, because things are expensive, things are hard. We've read all the articles top to bottom, kind of every step of the music making process or the music sharing process, um, is hard, or even worse, is predatory. And you're just seeing all these amazing people, talented people, get just wrecked and disillusioned and kind of the pressure cooker of what it means to sort of survive. And that's really scary to me. It's scary to me that art would, you know, get, I don't know, get destroyed is maybe too dramatic a word, but it's scary to me the possibility of amazing, talented artists giving up, I guess. And I'm scared about a world in which the only art that's being made is the stuff that feels really like smart or commercial, or the art that don't, make sense on the spreadsheet. I think probably some of our favorite music and art and stuff that has happened across history, people were unsure about, or maybe it was a slow burn, or it didn't like come out of the gates, whatever, um, with fanfare. So I'm certainly passionate about trying to keep the artistic creative spirit alive, not just in myself, but with friends and peers, and to, build places that foster that. And I think what we're finding in Mexico City is that, um, there's a lot of energy, a lot of people, and also certain costs are less. So there's ways in which certain
Mm.
artists and setups, people can kind of focus on what they're passionate about maybe a little more easily than like friends in Nashville that are maybe having to, you know, make harder choices of this or that just because it's getting harder and harder and harder. So I know this is sort of more of like a logistic answer, but it is kind of the reality that I think a lot of people, but especially a lot of artists, are having to, deal with every day.
Yeah. And we're not going to really, I've talked to a lot of artists about the fact that none of the math makes sense on any of this stuff in
Yeah.
terms of the music industry right now. Like it just doesn't. I guess what's interesting is, so do you plan to make music out of Mexico City, or are you going to be doing other things? So are you actively involved in the recording studio aspect, and will you be hosting and producing other bands and things just like a studio would in Nashville
Hmm.
or like Muscle Shoals? That's part of it? And then tell me more about the community center and like what are some of those things that
Yeah.
you're involved with?
So, like at our core, Casa de Copas, and that name, as a quick aside, is um, kind of in reference to um, a suit in tarot, which is cups. So in tarot, there's like different suits, and they have different meanings. Some of some of the tarot mythology, and cups is the suit of like creative intuition and creative instinct, and that kind of creative spirit. And so the vision of this place is always that it is, House of Cups, Casa de Copas.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are in this really cool, like 3-story building that used to be an old Sony Studios in the 70s. So we have
Nice.
3 different like main studio rooms, and then we have a bunch of other smaller rooms, and we have an amazing courtyard and rooftop, um, kind of like with a stage and a terrace and a kitchen and all this kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, at our core, we are a recording studio, but the hope is that because we have these other spaces and because we ourselves are musicians and artists, is that we are able to have gatherings and programs and other things that are happening in the space and through the space and the kind of extended universe of people that have come through or are here, um, to connect and I think be exploratory about what you just asked. It's like we don't have, a specifically set like this is what this is exactly going to be, as much as, man,
Yeah.
we're craving connecting with other creatives and artists. We're craving space to be together that's not at a bar or not at even a show. It's hard to catch up, or sometimes people can only come to a recording studio when they're paying top dollar. So the hope is that, as we stabilize as a studio, um, we can have more and more margins and space to be facilitators of creative community, and kind of see where that leads us. And in some ways, not have to have an answer to some questions. I think again that's the sort of promise and offering of a place like Mexico City is that there's a little more breathing room than maybe would be in like LA or something, and we're excited to see what that allows us and the kind of people we get to meet and just be together and talk about making music and make music and being human and all those good things.
No, that's cool. So is your wife part of it, or does she have her own kind of profession and career? And how was that to convince her,
That's
to
a
kind
great
of,
question.
leave
She's
leave
a
East Tennessee?
yeah, exactly. She's an architect, by trade, and got her master's in architecture. So she's an incredible designer, and is also working on fashion and clothing, and really pushing the envelope of how even some of those things intersect with architecture. And so she was really excited by this move because Mexico City is like an incredible city for design. Um, and I would be lying to say like this isn't. She's very much feels involved in it in the sense that like we're kind of very much in this together. A move like this, there's not like okay, you do you, and
Right.
I'll do me over here. And candidly too, I mean, just coming into a new city culture space, like neither of us speak Spanish super well, so just learning a lot of things together and trying to support each other. And I think we're both. I know that we're both really interested in the similar things of what it means to be a modern creative or a modern artist, like we were just talking about. And what do you do when the numbers don't work? Do you give up, or you try to find other ways to evolve and adjust your expectations? And you know, one for me, one for you, kind of energy towards like the man or towards whatever it may be. So just yeah, trying to fight to be us.
No, that's great. Can I ask you what you did for your day job in Knoxville?
Yeah. So when I'm still doing it, just candidly. I mean, speaking of side hustles and things, it's all There's really no escaping. So I'm coming from the sort of like marketing tech world. Um, so I've been the marketing director for a couple different like tech software startups, um, which, there's some fun things, and sometimes it's has a kind of modicum of creativity, but ultimately it's not something I'm super passionate about. Something that I've learned how to do to kind of stabilize and pay bills and things like that. Yeah, I think even like years of being in a touring band, and I was the front guy and the kind of like the head managerial operations sort of figure in our band. So learned a lot of skills in that transferred a little better than I expected to. So I'm thankful for that. Helped me sort of just get on the grid for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, good. Well, good luck with the Spanish. I will say,
Gracias.
did you ever see Princess Bride? You know, the movie?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know how fast it took you to look like you're from Mexico. But you have the Inigo Montoya look down pat.
Huge compliment.
So
Well,
you
thank you.
got the hair, you got the mustache. It's all there.
Well, for better for worse, this is how I moved here looking, and it's nice because I don't stand out like I'm a total tourist, but then sometimes people can hop right into Spanish or thinking that I'm Mexican in a way that I am not. And I was like, whoa, 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 let's slow down. But yeah.
No, it's good. You got the look. That's great. All right, so let's pivot a little bit to the music and the art. And I think you have a new album
Mm,
that I think is going to be released this month, which is July 2024.
yeah, just a few weeks away.
Yeah, so that's exciting. Congrats! And this is, I think, the
Thank you.
first full one that you've done in a bit, right?
Yeah, it's been a couple years.
Yeah.
um, Sort of been the nature of having the day job, like chipping away at writing songs and recording songs and kind of nights and weekends over the last few
Right.
years. So always thankful to be able to pull it off. Not to sound self-important at all, but it's just like, ooh, it's hard to do when work's kind of kicking your ass every day. To find those little slivers of trying to chip away at it.
Yeah. So the move to Mexico City was just, it doesn't sound like it was tied to like the new album or anything. It just sort of happened independently. And you've been releasing some of the singles, I think, for the better part of, a year, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. What's interesting, to be honest, is, I've seen some of your other interviews, and when you, I think, came on to the music scene, I think you were heavily influenced by some of my favorite bands, like the Lumineers and Mumford and
Mm-hmm.
Sons and things like that. And that roots rock or Americana sort of genre.
Yeah.
And then again, in preparing for this, I came across a new term I hadn't heard about. I'm not an expert in music, but this notion of freak folk, which is cool. But I think what I was going to ask you is, the songs on this new album, it's a departure from that roots
Yeah.
rock vibe and or sound, right? And I guess what was interesting is, did you happen upon that just in terms of like experimenting and with different instrumentation, or were you intentional, like, hey, I'm gonna that sort of purpose, and I want to find something new?
Yeah.
I'm interested in that shift.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I mean, you're absolutely right. Kind of, we came up with that whole wave of Lumineers, Mumford, Avett Brothers, Head and the Heart, and they were huge early inspirations for me. If nothing else, even to just kind of give me permission to kind of find my voice. Like my voice was never like a pop voice or super like clean and choral or um, refined in any way. And so I remember hearing like early Avett Brothers and just being, whoa, you can sing like this? Like people will still listen. And so like, all this band's still, very near and dear to my heart, kind of what they gave me access to. And I would say in terms of sort of like the sonic shift, maybe even from those early days to now, um, it's definitely intentional. Um, I think in the sense of like I find myself thinking in terms of albums and thinking of like what do I what do I want to do next? What do I want to explore? The ways in which I mean, to be honest, I don't have like a huge following. So I don't have people that are like, oh my God, we're going to burn the house down if it doesn't sound exactly the same. So I have some like freedom to just be creatively exploratory and to say like, what's interesting to me, um, whether that's conceptual or sonic. Um, the last record I did was called Give Me Time. And it was my first album without kind of my full touring band that I had been like running and gunning with for like 10 years. And also when we were, kind of out and about and playing shows regularly, you kind of like your sound gets a little more codified, and, you can really kind of feel the energy, the desire, and the kind of momentum of certain kinds of sounds. And you're just playing in bars all the time. So like there's certain kinds of music that like really lends itself to public performances. And so with Give Me Time, it was an opportunity for me to kind of get quieter and a little more introspective and personal, because I was kind of it was just me, and I can kind of just write the songs I wanted to write about and kind of tell some stories. Um, and that really freed me coming into this record, because I'd just made a few things by this point. So I felt like I didn't have really anything to prove. And I was, I think also just the way that content and music exist now in 2024 or 23 back then, when I was recording, like people just don't care that much. Like we live in a day and age of like little snippets of sound and video and singles and this and that. And I think genre and style and stuff is like squishier and more gray than it has ever been. And so, and even kind of culturally, it feels like there's permission to just like see and explore. Um, and so I know I'm sort of like maybe getting ahead of myself a little bit, but the process of this record, recording it, was really fun for me, because I came in with, 10 voice memos of just me playing the acoustic guitar with a band. And I kind of brought in some musicians that I really trust and love their sensibility. And we only had like 4 days. I had like 4 days off of work. It's like a long weekend. I was like, okay, guys, let's get in here and like make some decisions and like respond. And so I would kind of I would like pull up a song and say, hey, here's what this song is about to me. Here's sort of the emotive landscape I'm interested in. I would like play it, and like most of them heard it for the first time in that moment. And then we went in there and they said, okay, let's like find it. And those choices really kind of became the scaffolding, the skeletons of these songs. And it was so freeing to just make decisions and not have to like belabor and be like, what's right? Or who's Cereus Bright? What's the right genre? What's the right this? To really just get to be able to respond to the moment, songs. I mean, I joke even like the time of day. Like some of these songs certainly like went harder than I expected them to, or quieter, or whatever it is, just because of whenever we were making those decisions. And that was a very fun, frank process to just not kind of have like a scarcity mindset of like, oh, I've got to get this exactly right, which is maybe how I felt my earlier, recordings and stuff, to just be like, this is awesome. We get to like share these songs, and we get to just like make some cool shit. And these musicians that I really respect are excited. To me, that's like the gold standard is like, are the musicians having a good time? And like kind of using that more as my guiding light than anything else. And so the end product, yeah, is like a bunch of songs that have a big sonic range, um, which was really exciting for me, and definitely something I want to keep exploring. Um, just sort of the sky's the limit. It's just like there are no rules, so just have some fun. And once I was able to kind of like get into that state, yeah, it was fun and really
No, it's
rewarding.
good. Yeah. So I'm not a musician. Um, so I'm probably talking out of turn here, but to record these songs in such a small amount of time, they sound like there's a lot going on, a lot of
Hmm.
instrumentation, a lot of different sounds. I guess, can you just off the top of your head, it's not just an acoustic guitar, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
the record that you mentioned. So like give us a sense of the different instruments that were involved, and how were you able to come to so many decisions so fast when
Yeah.
it does sound like a lot going on, like not in a bad way, but just
Yeah.
more than just a
Yeah.
rock.
It's not your standard, just kind of like folk or rock song.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I should be fair to say that those kind of early short tight days were really just the kind of skeletons of the songs. So we were kind of getting the core instruments, which would be guitar, bass, drums, that kind of thing, some piano. And then we would spend the next 6 months to a year kind of in the spaces when I could doing what in music is called overdubbing. So it's like you're like recording, other instruments at other times. And so we were able to really kind of use the seed of what we got in those initial recording sessions to kind of figure out what maybe the song's identity was, and to think about what other instruments, we kind of play nice with it. So to your question, I mean, lots of little electronics and layers, and maybe like soft synthesizer kind of like keyboard pad stuff. Also a lot of like kind of more orchestral leaning stuff. So a lot of the songs have tons of strings on them, woodwinds, horns. um, those were sounds that I was especially pushing for, because um, tonally I knew I wanted the song to feel pretty like a little like otherworldly, not in like a necessarily sci-fi way, but as more of like a mythological, fantastical way, like something that felt, like it could be in a fantasy novel or something like that. um, and for me, yeah, for me, the kind of, I don't want to be too reductive about it, but like a lot of the themes are in the album revolve around like meaning making. Like, what does it look like? What matters to us? Like, who are we? What is our future? All these kind of, maybe shared universal existential questions. But my hope was that there would be a sort of hopeful tone to it, and kind of like a maybe optimistic tone to it, not just like a cynical nihilistic tone. And so for me, I was interested in exploring some of those themes in a sort of more otherworldly, mythological way, in which maybe in the past I had written very personally, and there's still some songs like that on this record. um, but was kind of trying to push the sounds into spaces that felt different and fresh, or new at least. um, so there's a lot of layers on most of these songs, um, and so much so that like you could be listening and not really even know what's going on, but that's something else I was interested in, is that it had some of that kind of wall of sound, tons of layers. Because to me, this is kind of how life feels, is that there's a lot of things hitting us at once, and a lot that we're trying to navigate and make sense of. And so even to have the format of the music sort of be a cue towards some of those themes, I like kind of thinking of it in that way. And the hope is with people that enjoy the songs, they could go and listen back and hear different layers, and oh, that's an electric guitar over there, no way, or like I've never heard that string part before,
Mhm.
with different lessons and stuff.
So the album's called Anything, and
Yeah.
it'll be available, July 2024, which is great. I'm not a big fan of music people or
I'm
musically
not a big
people.
fan, but I'm sure
No,
you
not
guys
not a
love
big
it.
fan of yeah, I didn't mean it like that. So what I was gonna say is I'm not a big fan of people, music journalists, or talking heads that compare artists to other artists, because I don't think it's fair to either one, because everybody's unique and individual. But it did remind me of Sufjan Stevens sound or Bon Iver
Yeah.
sound and things like that. So I guess, can you point to any specific influences that might have sort of triggered something at some point that said, "Oh yeah, that's I'm into that. I need to pursue that."
Yeah, those are both two great references of people that are definitely kind of exist in my, you know, maybe musical DNA. Um, Another band that I really love, there's a band called Midlake, and they have a record called The Trials of Van Occupanther. It's a really weird, it's sort of like early aughts, kind of folky, but sort of like this one is for me, of like maybe the core is some folky songs, but there's a lot of like lush instrumentation. Um, I think they're actually a Texas band as well, because you're in Texas, right? Did I make that
I'm in
up?
Atlanta. Yeah, I'm in
Oh,
Atlanta.
I don't know why I thought maybe I saw
Yeah,
something on your Instagram that was filmed in Fort Worth.
yeah, Fort Worth. Yeah, yeah.
But they're another band, especially that record, that felt very kind of ethereal and
Hmm.
mystical, that I really liked. Um, but also kind of to the point of like kind of how we made some of the stuff before, it was nice to bring in musicians with a lot of different sensibilities and kind of just
Mm,
like let them respond. And again, this sort of the freedom of like the sort of musician and place I'm in right now with like my music is that we don't really have to kind of aim at anything. So, I mean, functionally, it's like I probably made like a 20, 30 song playlist of like vibes, like, hey, I like this, but, stuff that's kind of all over the spectrum. And it could be stuff that was
right,
ambient, all the way stuff that's like
right.
very intimate, and definitely Sufjan's on there, and, um, you know, Midlake and other ones that, I'm not like, hey, let's copy this,
Yeah,
definitely did that earlier in my career or musical
right.
journey. I'd like pull up a song and be like, okay, how do we sound exactly like this? Um, and it never goes as well as you want it to. You're always left feeling like, damn, I don't sound as good, and
Yeah.
maybe I didn't even really creatively express myself. I sort of just tried to imitate something. So um, it
No,
was really
kudos
fun.
to you for like taking the leap, out of a comfort zone that was, I think, fairly successful because you've got millions and millions of streams
Yeah,
on that part of your
yeah,
journey. So good for you for having the confidence and the wherewithal to say like, okay, I'm going to try something new. So it's awesome, and it sounds great. And I'd like to talk about a couple of the songs if you don't mind,
yeah. I'd love to. Thank
just in
you.
terms of, because I think I'm a lyric guy, because I don't play instruments, so I don't have the appreciation of all of the complexities and of the sounds and the tones and everything. Which the sound on this album and all the songs that I've listened to, that's what that's what I pay
Mm,
attention to, and that's what's kind of like striking. It's really beautiful. It's like you said, sonic. It's almost like sort of in this dream space,
hmm.
while you're listening. But I think the lyric on one caught my attention, which I love, and that's there's a song I think called "Boys."
Hmm.
Is that right? In
Yep.
the opening line, I'm gonna probably screw this up, but it's essentially like, "What are we gonna do with the boys whose mothers
Hmm.
drink, or
Yep.
are
Drank
drinking,
themselves silly, waiting for
drink
husbands to
themselves
come home
silly?"
from money. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So if we can start with that one, the context of that, is that a is that personal?
Yeah.
What's the story there? Yeah,
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you for listening to those kind words. And I also am a lyric guy. There's many a beautiful song that I've had to turn off because I can't stand the lyrics. Not to say that mine are the best, but we all have our little isms. Yeah, Boys is, in terms of kind of the spectrum of the record, maybe one of the more sort of storytelling, personal ones. It's one that's sort of been in like the hopper for a long time. Um, and that first lyric kind of came from me hearing two different stories. One was about my wife's dad, who was maybe like a troubled kid kind of thing, and got sent to like a military boarding school. And hearing stories about that, and there's pros and cons, but a lot of cons when you're kind of taken away from your family. And then I heard another story about my grandfather, who was a really complicated character in our family. He's a pretty terrible dude. Um, a major alcoholic, a major kind of like a abusive type person. Had 10 wives over the course of his life, um, and it was just hard. It's like always grew up hearing really terrible stories about him, and then heard that um, his parents didn't want to deal with him and sent him to boarding school when he was like 3 years old. And the boarding school was like, we don't take kids this young, like, no. And they already had another kid there, like, well, if you don't take them, we're gonna take our other kid away, and you're gonna lose our like donor money. And like the boarding school was like, okay, fine, we'll figure out what to do with them. And maybe there's a little bit of a fish story in there, like maybe he wasn't quite that young, but certainly was young, and the spirit of it was just like, oh, there's always a bigger story, the kind of classic hurt people, and just kind of thinking about the legacy of choices. And the end lyric in that verse, if I can quote myself, is, isn't it funny who we blame? And it's true, and I think that whole song is a little bit of an investigation of some of that, like how we want to put the world in neat little boxes where there's a protagonist and an antagonist, a good guy and a bad guy, and it's just like rarely that clear. And even if it is, even there was a really bad person, that probably happened in a context too. And it's not to say to like, you know, I don't know, forgive or excuse anything. It's more just to understand that the world is complex. And I think for me, even that song just became even a little bit bigger of an investigation of like, I don't know, there's a lot of things in the world that feel like they're, like I was saying earlier, are predatory or kind of like out to get me or out to get us. And it's easy to view the world maybe a little more one dimensionally, like the black and white. Just be like, oh, well, maybe some of these things that hurt me, that wasn't the intent. Or maybe it was a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And, we talked about church earlier, and that's a great example. It's just like, whew, like, can you approach life with a little more nuance? And that's hard. But that sort of like thinking about it hyper specifically and personally of like those kind of two characters kind of set me on that journey of maybe thinking about it on a grander scale.
No, that's great. While you were talking, because I come from an upbringing in the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I attended so many church services growing up. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't count.
My dad's a pastor, so
Yeah,
it's
I know
hard. It's
you've
hard for
got
me to
that.
be beat.
Yeah, but I think to your point though, I think that maybe it was subconscious, but I think part of your faith experience probably played into that, because I think like when you're younger, it's so black and white,
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
so this or that, and there's no ambiguity, there's no room for context and nuance and gray.
Yeah,
And having moved out of the Midwest and traveled the world for work or whatever, you get to meet people from different faiths or different
yeah,
backgrounds. The world is completely nuanced,
yep,
and
exactly.
you know, okay, I think it was your grandfather had 10
Hmm.
wives. Okay, well, I'm pretty sure, that's an extreme number, but I'm sure there's not too many 3-year-olds that were shipped to a boarding school,
Yep,
and
exactly.
sort of the damage. And so you might say, yeah, he's a bad person, and he's sinning, all those things that you kind of
Yeah,
hear, and oh yeah, that's we need to hold him accountable and things like that. It's like, well, he that's a hard life,
yeah,
and I think that's for me. Um, there's aspects of my faith that I still hold dear, but there's also just I think for me a better clarity of what reality is, I guess,
yeah,
in living. So I don't know, like
exactly.
today, and I want to come back to the song and some of the other songs, but was that an accurate
Yeah, you nailed it.
sort
You're
of
absolutely
context
right.
on this song? Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think you talk about the maybe sort of duality or the like black and whiteness of being younger and being part of like a pretty strict ideology. The irony is when I began to like deconstruct some of that stuff, um, unsurprisingly, my next version was also sort of binary and dualistic, but just from a different angle,
Mm.
And so I think for me, it hits on, and I mean, this whole record really does is sort of the musing over the nuance that we're talking about, and I think we as humans, you're going to get me preaching here, but I mean, we long to make sense of the world. We long to make sense of our reality, and what that does is it makes when entities, institutions, people, anything offers us an answer, also offers us a perspective that puts the world in a clear box, especially if it
Mm.
makes us hero. That's really attractive,
Mm.
and we long for that. I think we long for the order of like stuff being put in its right place because it is a relief from the weight of having to make sense of it yourself. Um, there's this philosopher that I came across in the process of writing some of these songs, a Polish guy named Zygmunt Bauman, and he has this concept of liquid modernity. And in that, he sort of posits that like the challenge of the modern person is that because so many like traditional institutions and things are sort of like crumbling or being investigated or like torn down, whether they're like physical or ideological or whatever, that's important real work and it's happening. But what it does is it leaves the individual with the weight of having to build a life, to build the scaffolding of meaning. Like what happens if you were a Christian and then you're not anymore? All the things that the faith provided you of how to order yourself in your life and how to view the world or your neighbor or yourself or your spouse, you have to now decide that for yourself or find another source that's going to give you an answer. Um, and so it's just a really interesting time, and I find myself really fascinated. I think because I came from such like a dense version of kind of the faith Christian world, in what those answers could be. And not even that I want to have the answer because I don't believe there is one, but I'm interested in that journey.
Mm.
And personally, I'm interested in like maintaining a posture of kind of openness and to not to need an answer all the time, you know. Um, and that's a hard place to kind of exist in because that sort of like existing in the I don't know can be really uncomfortable because you're still gonna wake up and live a life and make choices and stuff. So, um, yeah, I know I'm going off now,
No,
but that stuff is really at the heart of like this record and these songs is like, yeah, those kinds of questions, and not even so much that there's resolution as much as there is like, I don't know.
well, I think it's okay to not have the resolution,
Hmm.
because I think here's my theory for what it's worth. I think a lot of people that I just turned 50. People older than me, people your age, whatever, that grew up in the church. I think it's extremely difficult, and I understand where they're coming from. It's extremely difficult to look back, whether it's 10 years, 30 years, 50 years sometimes, when that's your life, and to actually sort of, even though it's so apparent that maybe Samson wasn't strong with before his hair was cut, or maybe Jonah didn't survive 3 days in a whale, like those things that are just truth, like that's true when you're in the church, those things are true. And
Yeah.
but I think the older you get, it's really hard to sort of question that and be open to the nuance and the gray,
Hmm.
because then you're basically saying, well, all those tens of thousands of hours that you've devoted to that activity or that belief is up for debate and may not
Yeah,
be true. Like that's a very difficult thing to
it
reconcile. And
is.
so I understand why people sort of still hold on to it, because it's hard to let that go.
It is. Yeah, and I think the older I get, the more sympathy maybe seems like I'm being a little condescending, but like the more understanding I have of people that are unable or unwilling to do that sort of investigation. And you know, uh, my parents, for example, are still very much like starkly in the world that we left, or I left rather, and that's okay. I think even making sure, like I said earlier, to not meet something that feels too specific with something else that feels too specific. Like, no, you're just wrong, I'm right. It's just like, I
Right,
don't know.
right.
And your point about what is truth and what is helpful and useful. Yeah, I find my mind and my heart like evolving in my relationship with like what those things are and like what the right like metrics are, which I'm thankful for, because one of my biggest fears kind of coming out of that world was to have blinders on. So I am, again, not to beat a dead horse, but even just like with these songs, even writing them are sort of my own little meditations of like remaining open, curious, like you talk about on the podcast, and like
Right.
that just it's a posture that feels essential and important to the human experience, and so one that I'd much rather be curious and full of wonder and exploration than to try to like be right or to like go find the right answer. Spend enough of my life doing that. And so,
That's
yeah, maybe
great.
that's also a little bit of
No,
luxury of like being more of like a artistic-y, music-y
yeah.
person. It's just like, oh, I'm just gonna see. But yeah.
No, that's good. Well, I'm actually surprised earlier when you were referencing Midlake and Sufjan that you didn't throw in DC Talk or Petra as
Oh,
some
they're
of your
they're they're
influence.
they're deep back in the deep attic of myself. Um, Positive, encouraging K-Love, the Christian radio station that played in Memphis, was a big part of my musical, if not all of my musical exposure up until like, you know, maybe my junior year of high school. I was just like only listening to Christian music.
Yep. Well, by the way, do you regret that? Because I have a similar experience, and
Yeah.
some days I'm like, listen, it was my journey, and I was exposed to certain things. But then when people are talking about, whatever band
Hmm.
back in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, I'm like, I didn't listen to that because I was listening to this other stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I missed out on so much. Like,
Yeah.
do you regret that?
I do. Um, you know, the short answer is yes. I mean, I think that there's a lot of amazing music and there's a lot of really shitty Christian music. So it's just
Yeah,
like funny to be like, oh, like as my music sensibility was, you know, growing or shaping, that was the stuff that I was exposed to. And
yeah,
to give credit, like yes, the Beatles were sometimes played in the house. Like it
right,
wasn't a
right.
complete island. But there's just so much out there. And I think especially knowing that I have some sort of musical affinity, I would have been curious of what, you know, how things could have gone if I had gotten started earlier or maybe had been exposed to a wider range. But
Yeah,
you never know how those things would or would not have shaped, you know,
right.
us or
Yeah,
me. So
you can only sort of like, focus on now and in the future,
yeah,
which is good. All right, so boys is sort of that tension, if it is, or I guess the recognition of, not this or that, but kind of everything in between, which is
yeah.
neat. I guess the last song I think is, it's called, Don't You Fake It Too, or something
Mm.
like that. That's interesting. What can you give me the insight on that one?
Man, yeah,
Just
you're choosing some of my faves, especially like
yeah,
lyrically. I think,
yeah,
yeah, that one is probably an extension of the same conversation, of what it means to sort of stare off into the distance and wonder. It's the last, song on the album, and so it felt appropriate, or maybe that's why I put it there. Is it feels like it has a little bit of like a thesis statement kind of energy of, um, yeah, the like I kind of have been saying, the human experience to try to find and make meaning, um, and was what I love most about that song is there's an outro kind of bridge section, where I just sort of like repeat the same lyrics that, I don't want to like quote myself too much or do it wrongly. I think I say, I hope your hands find a way. Oh God, now I can't even remember it without singing it. Essentially, like to build a better life, and
mm,
it's unclear who I'm talking to, and um, maybe I'm gonna like ruin it a little bit, but that's intentional.
mm,
It's maybe a little bit of like a sort of humanistic prayer for myself. It's something to like, maybe I don't have kids, but like if I have kids, to them, to my
mm.
peers, to the world. Um, oh, I know what it is. I hope your hands find or oh God, now see, I can't remember. It's okay. Um,
Okay. Well,
but it's
what's the faking? Like, who are you saying not to fake?
mm,
And what are you trying to avoid? What
yeah.
yeah.
Um, I think there's a moment in that lyric. I wrote it so long ago. I'm trying to like kind of like tap back into the headspace, but it's that sense, I think, that like, hey, be honest with yourself, or like,
Mm,
dare we be honest with ourselves about those things in us that don't fit, whether
mm,
that's as something as specific and personal as like a relationship, or like a husband or wife relationship or partner relationship, or something as kind of macro and big like we're talking about, of like faith or ideology or something. And yeah, the sort of spirit of those lyrics in those verses, or that they could be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but is that sense of like looking back on a chunk of time and having invested a lot into something, and one, like we're saying, wondering if it was worth it, wondering if it was the right way, wondering how to file it. Um, and there's sort of a cry for help in there of like, am I alone in being suspicious? Am I alone in faking it? Um, and and maybe this is sort of the pastor's kid in me, but I think there's something. My hope is that there's an invitation in there for anyone to be honest about what they really feel, and sometimes you need someone to kind of like take the first step or to say the thing out loud first and be like, hey, I'm faking it, are you? And then someone, yes, I have been. Or like, no, wait, what? Wait, maybe, and it's its own journey. um so yeah, I think it's all sort of mix of personal and existential and everything kind of like
Yeah.
rolled into one.
Interesting. All right. So, which song on the album are you not most proud of? Because I'm sure you're proud of all of them, but is like, okay, this is the best example of this part of my life, and this represents the best, whether it's the lyrics or whether it's the sound or both. Like
Hmm.
that, if someone, obviously we want people to listen to the whole album, but
Right.
what's the one that sticks out in your head that you want to kind of share?
Hmm. I mean, I really am partial to the ones we've already talked about, but I also do really love Seven Wonders, which is the first track. It's just robust and lush and big and fun. Like I mean, it's not fun, but it's cool, and it sort of was like I kind of like got to go all the way with it production wise.
Hmm.
I think it has kind of like the most stuff going on, um, and that was like really fun to make, and probably even tonally was able like helped me kind of put a stake in the ground of like where I wanted to go like with the rest of the album. Kind of gave myself permission to be a little bit more abstract and mythological, like I'm saying, like because so much of my songs in the past have been a little more personal and storytelling-y. I wanted to challenge myself to be more abstract and lean on metaphor and imagery in ways that I hadn't done as much in the past, or in that way. And so that's a fun one to listen to and maybe kind of get some thematic and sonic tones for the rest of the album.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what you've touched on it, which I really appreciate it, and I think you've answered probably this indirectly throughout the conversation. I always ask everybody because I'm curious, like what are you most curious about, like in this stage in your life? It seems like
Mm,
everything. Like it feels like you're on a journey right now,
I
But what
certainly
is
am.
there? Yeah, is there? Yeah, what comes to mind?
Yeah. Well, to kind of return to the end of the Don't You Fake It Too song, I think there's a challenge and a desire to build or even rebuild, um, a sort, meaning a life. Like I think the challenge for me, someone in my mid 30s, is to not just like be mad at the world or upset and feel like, well, fuck it, I'm just done. Like let's just stop, or I want my whole life to be about me, or some sort of like self survivalism. I think I'm interested in making things, making relationships, maybe even building new structures and institutions that help us as people keep going, and not just in a sort of like climate change, like the physical world, which is all very important, but also in a very like emotional, ideological, philosophical way. Because, yeah, I mean, when I look around, I see so many peers and people really unhappy and really hurting and really lost. And I think have kind of shaken off, like we've been talking about this whole call, like a lot of the certain institutions or ideologies or certain things about their past that felt oppressive, but now they're sort of in the expanse. And I kind of feel like there needs to be something after the expansiveness of like, okay, we're free. It's like, okay, so now what? And um, I don't know what that is, but I'm interested in it because I think, again, you're going to get me preaching again, but like, I think a lot of millennials, I'll speak for myself or ourselves and say that like we're really wary of making decisions. We're wary of commitment. We're wary of choices or things that feel like they constrain us or limit us, because that feels like the old way of like the traditional way of like, oh, this is the right way to be. But
Mm,
I think we need some of that. I do think that there's something really powerful about like making a choice and like rooting and grounding and in ritual or in regularity or gatherings or like things that got thrown out when so many people have left the church, for example. Like
mm,
there's tons of stuff there of social community rhythms and things that are not present. And I see a lot of people seem to be hurting. And even with this like studio that we're doing here in Mexico, seeing people craving stuff like what
mm,
we're making here is not a church. I mean, it's just like there's no crucifix on the wall and none of us are Christians or even like faith driven, but I'm seeing hunger for stuff. And I
mm,
don't want to be like afraid to like investigate what's happening and find myself, curious and passionate about, building whatever that may be or finding people that want to build that. Um, so that's all very heady and maybe
sorry,
not
you're
super
not.
interesting. I could have said like,
Mm,
I don't know, video games or something. But the
you're
reality
good.
is that is the stuff that really like motivates me and inspires me and what I find myself really like curious about.
Great. No, that's good. So the album's coming out this month. You're in Mexico City, I guess. For your fans that have been following you, what can they expect from you? Are you going to support this with a tour anytime soon? Are you going to be in Mexico City for the foreseeable future? And what do you have planned for like 2025?
Yeah. No foreseeable touring. It's hard enough to do it in the States, much less, traveling to do it and stuff like that. But I'm going to try to do a better job of, you know, being online, but at the same time, maybe I won't because it's killing us and us all. So trying to find that balance of, that. So yeah, I mean, I would say to anyone that's listening or tuning in or curious, I would really challenge anyone and it would mean the world to do a deep dive I've appreciated you doing, of just really sitting with it and listening to it. um it's not songs in an album that was intended to be like commercially successful or like gonna blow up and have all these singles, which is funny because we've had to release them one by one, but like it really is hopefully intended to be a sort of invitation into these sorts of musings and meditations of what it means to be human and to look for meaning. So if anything, I would just ask people to spend time with it. And, I'm always available. Obviously I like to hear myself talk. So, uh, if I'm not out there doing, that's okay. But anyone can always, send me a message and I'm usually pretty available, through Instagram or what have you. So you know where to
Uh,
find me. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
yep.
Hi, this is Cereus Bright, and this is a song called Boys.
Okay. And if you don't mind, I think we
Where
talked
do
about boys
you
quite a bit, so you
put
can just say, "Hey,
all
this
the
is
boys
we talked about
had
boys, blah blah blah," and then I
mothers
forgot the second
who
one you
drank
mentioned. But if we didn't talk
themselves
about
sick,
it, if you could just give a
waiting for
30 20 second, 30
husbands to
second sort of
come home with
synopsis.
money. Isn't it funny who we blame?
Were those questions okay?
It's hard to believe with your face.
Well, no, I was, I try to watch stuff that's available, and when you were on another
Just
podcast and
had
you mentioned DC Talk and the whole
patience,
thing, I was
somebody
cracking up because man,
started
I
it.
would literally
Don't
just go
be
spend
an
$15 every week at
easy target.
the Limestone bookstore in Columbia, Missouri, on a CD, and it was usually, you know, whatever, Michael
No
W. Smith,
cake until you
Newsboys,
played
all the
it
shit,
clean.
and although did you, I do need
No
to ask
love
because
until I know
I still
you
listen to Rich
can
Mullins.
give
Did
it
you ever listen to
back
Rich
to
Mullins?
me.
So
A
he was good, right?
light is
I mean,
setting through the trees. Don't
oh yeah,
wait
Wilcox.
for
No, he's good.
me.
Yeah, Pierce Pettis. But yeah,
But all of the
Rich was,
sharp
he was
ends are
he was part of the
found
scene,
in the
but he wasn't of the
basement.
scene.
There's too much to
But
do and
cool.
money
Well, I'll edit all
needs
that out. But yeah,
making
go ahead
some
and
bets
I
are
appreciate
worth
you doing
taking.
this. And
Horses
yeah, I'll let you go.
are ready to run. Don't borrow your way through the land of the living.
Hey, Tyler. Sorry, can you hold on one second?
And
Let me just change one thing.
All that we're given, the sky doesn't look right. Remember to change flights.
Hang on, I don't hear the guitar.
No cake
And it's
until
probably
your
on my
plate is
end. Hang on one
clean.
second.
No love until I know that you can give it back to me. A light is setting through the tree.
Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop.
Don't wait for me.
I'm just going to stop recording and then change a setting and then just hopefully kind of, yeah, see if it works. Hang on one second.
This next song is called Unfaithful, and it's kind of a personal song. It's a song that investigates desire. You know, I think there are moments in which we all have either passing thoughts or big dark desires or things that we want that we don't know how to file or don't know what to do with, and not even that they're always bad. You know, I think my relationship to desire, or the world's relationship to desire, is really interesting. You know, we sort of live in a you do you culture where more and more we're kind of celebrating, hey, if you want it, go get it, you know, but it's not always that simple or easy. So sort of trying to investigate it without there being a conclusion, you know, which is sort of classic me. Like often the stories we hear about desire, people wanting stuff, it always ends in the person getting the thing that they want. Yeah, I'm Cereus Bright, and this is a song called Unfaithful. I'd be unfaithful if I could get away from all the consequences. I work so hard to create beautiful David. You are a work of art, and I am Jonathan. Late in the night, nobody knows. A candle flickers, shadows on the wall. Fly, 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 fly me home before we let ourselves go, before the colors start to show. Fly me home. You didn't call me. I said I was working late. The fall, then the winter came. A walk on a moonless night. There is an ocean growing between our worlds, being the first to speak. is the hardest thing. The sink is leaking, someone's knocking at the door. Fly, 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 fly me home before we let ourselves go, before the colors start to show. Fly me home. Thanks for listening.